Welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, and we're here to give an insider's look at the music industry. I'm joined by my co-host, Jon, from the Melrose Audio team. We're in 3 different locations, including the audio studio at the Melrose Center of the Orlando Public Library. Today's guest is world-renowned mastering engineer Bob Katz. Bob is a mastering, recording, and mix engineer, inventor, author, photographer, systems and software designer, Tesla owner, and all-around genial personality. Please welcome our guest, Bob Katz.
With that introduction, maybe I shouldn't speak at all. I don't want to spoil the record.
I guess we're going to start off with you giving us a little bit of your history, Bob.
Oh, I'll make it real quick.
All right.
I was always an audiophile kind of person. Even in high school, I played around with tape recorders and microphones and recorded my high school graduation and still have the tape, although I haven't listened to it in decades. Then I moved. Eventually, I worked at a 24-track studio in Vermont, and then I eventually moved to New York City and became a commercial recording engineer, during which time I was a member of the New York Audio Society, and the Village Voice wrote up an article about me, which a young producer, composer named David Chesky read the article, and he filed it. He said, I want to form an audiophile record company, and this guy looks like the best recording engineer that I might like to find. And so David got a hold of me, and the first thing we did was restore some classic RCA tapes of Ravel, Daphnis and Chloe, or is it Daphne et Chloe? I wouldn't know.
Oui.
And from a gorgeous 30 IPS from 1956. It was one of the earliest stereo recordings, and I restored that. And then David said, well, I'd like to do some original recordings, and but I want to use a single microphone. I said, I'm your guy, because I had done tons of that, recording folk music and jazz music and even mixing some rock, all direct to 2-track tape with my portable setup, which I built myself. And so, I was this guy, and I became the technical director of Chesky Records, which is still very, very active today, doing audiophile recordings, and got to record some of the most well-known jazz artists and some pop artists, including Livingston Taylor. And we made a number of singers famous in the audiophile world with test recordings that were played at hi-fi shows around the world. And so that was where I made my name. Not that I hadn't had a name before, but the Chesky got me off the ground. And then I built a mastering studio in New York, and eventually I moved to Florida in '96. David brought me up to New York for one recording after that, and decided that it was too expensive for him to fly me to New York for all these recordings, so he hired somebody else. But I don't know if they ever achieved the quality that I first started off with. And I've been recording, mixing, and mastering ever since.
Great. Well, I think one of the first things we want to talk about is your mastering of the new kid in town that we recorded at my recording workshop at the Melrose Center.
Were you there, Jonathan? Were you in my session? Yeah, sorry, I didn't remember your name, but
both Jonathan and Chase, whose image you see quizzically looking at you, were at that session at Digital Domain.
Okay, so welcome back. You guys hopefully remember that it was a very nice mix done by, Bruce and various students at the Melrose Center, plus, of course, an original re-recording and rearrangement of a classic tune. And my motto, if you may recall, for this recording was, don't fix what ain't broke. So, I do believe that if there's ways that I can enhance, I do. And I'd like to think that I found a musical way to enhance it without hurting the tonal balance or any of it, just seeing if I could improve the impact. And we have some examples which I sent. So the first recording I'd like you to listen to is an excerpt from New Kid in Town, the original mix that was sent to me by the Melrose Center. Here it is.
You're walking away and they're talking behind you. They will never forget you till somebody new comes along. Where you've been lately, there's a new kid in town. Everybody loves him, don't they? He's holding her, and you're still around. There's a new kid in town. Just another new kid in town.
Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that recording, but I did feel that there's, and I try to think musically, I did feel that the transitions between the verse and the chorus, the felt, well, didn't quite have the energy that that I think that the original recording by the Eagles did, and and it would be nice if we could impart some of that energy in. So the next thing I did was worked. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. I don't know if I manually raised the gain on the chorus or if I applied an upward expander. Do you guys remember if I did that?
I remember there being a use of expansion.
Okay. All right. So it's a rare tool. These days, you'll see a lot of mastering engineers employing a compressor, but I felt that the dynamic range in a very subtle way could improve just because of the when you go from in a classic song like this, from the verse to the chorus, there should be a little bit more energy. So I did that with both a processor, and maybe I also manually raised it. But we're not talking about a dB or 2 or 3. Maybe I raised it a quarter dB or a half for a subtle enhancement. So for a second here, let's listen to the master, but I want you to play a little piece. Actually, play that once again, just a little portion of the mix, followed by the master, but then stop.
Where you've been lately, there's a new kid in town. Everybody loves him, don't they? He's holding her, and you're still around. There's a new kid. Where you've been lately, there's a new kid in town. Everybody loves him, don't they? He's holding her, and you're still around. There's a new kid.
Oh my gosh. the master is louder. Well, it must be better. But, we have to be fair, and we should listen as matched as possible. So I've also sent you a level matched version of the mix, trying to get it as close to the master as possible. And that's what we're going to compare right now. So listen to the level matched mix, otherwise unprocessed, just raised in level, and then the master.
Where you've been lately? There's a new kid in town. Everybody loves him, don't they? He's holding her just in the right. There's a new kid. Where you've been lately? There's a new kid in town. Everybody loves him, don't they? He's holding her just in the right. There's a new kid.
Okay, now did any of you hear a difference? It shouldn't, knock you off your seats, because I wasn't trying to create a new performance. I was trying to bring out what was in the performance. And so it was one of my more naturalistic approaches. But I hope that you sensed a more impact and a little bit more vigorousness. Is that a word?
It is now.
A little more vigor. Well, vigor is a word. A little more vigor to the recording. And that was what my contribution was. Plus I don't know if I changed any tonality. It would have been very small anyway, because it was very warm and natural to begin with.
I believe that you added some bass enhancement.
Okay, a little bit of bottom end.
Yeah, you used low ender, possibly.
Low ender, yeah. Well, and there's
That
a
was the
new
plugin.
plugin in town by Leapwing Audio called Route 1, which is a serious rival to low ender, and you should look in it. But if you look behind me in Studio A, you'll see some very tall speakers that throw a wonderfully large soundstage. Did I have them when you guys were here? The Dynaudios? Okay. And the JL subwoofers, which cross over. Not that there's anything wrong with those Dynaudios. They go down to 27 hertz. But with the JLs, we go down to 15 hertz. And I do that. So if you don't have accurate monitoring, please don't venture with one of these bass subharmonic generators, or you could create some pretty subby, inaccurate recordings.
I think I've heard that guy beside me at the light in the end.
Yeah, and then I beat him with my Tesla. So yeah, the word to the wise, mastering is first and foremost about your ears and your experience, then the room and the acoustics, and the monitoring should be accurate. Go from all the way down to all the way up. Needs to be accurate so that you can make a judgment.
Chase or Jonathan, do either one of you have any questions for Bob?
I have a question. Yeah, I have a question. Hey, how are you? Is there anything that you did to kind of match or sound more vintage, or in your mind, how did you try and match the overall tone or go back and have that back in the day sound?
It's certainly possible, and I do that a lot, but I didn't need to with this mix. This was mixed under the supervision of Bruce Hensal, who knows these recordings really well, and even working in the digital domain and without any analog tape recorders, you guys achieved a natural, warm sound. Now, I did use some of the peripherals that you see behind me. I know that I used the Mazalek, which is right Yeah, right there. And the Mazalek is a very, it's a naturally warm compressor expander. And so I gravitated towards that, but I didn't want to create a muddy sound. I just wanted to create an open, clear, and pure sound. And using the analog processing, I think, accomplished that.
Yeah, I was very happy with the results that Bob was able to achieve with that recording. Any more questions on the mastering?
Well, let me expand on Jonathan's question. There's more stuff in the rack back here. I have tube compressors that I use sometimes. I have an analog tape simulator that is so good that the only thing you're missing is the smell of oil and relays. It saturates and very well when I need that. And of course, I do have my plugins, which we even talked about some of them. So whatever the job or whatever the project or the recording needs, I don't have any rules.
Any more questions? Chase?
Yeah. I was trying to, recall and think back to when we did the workshop. And I remember that you did come in on I think at least one day where we were mixing, but I remember you providing a lot of really great feedback during the mixing process, and I was just curious how often you're actually able to, or how often do you kind of interact in that way where you, before even trying to fix anything, are you able to often do that, or was that kind of a special case?
No, actually, very often. When a regular client comes to me, they know that they can send one song out of whatever it is, maybe a 10-song album. They can send one example song, and I will listen to it and give them comments, tell them if I think it's ready for mastering or if there's anything that I might suggest. Sometimes I'll suggest, in my opinion, and it's all opinion and it's based on experience, of course, in my opinion, the vocal might be a little bit under, which is, happens often enough. As mixing engineers, they're concentrating on, the mix and the balance, but maybe they're not paying attention to whether the vocal is sitting well enough above the instrument. So I might suggest, why don't you send me, and there are a couple of good reasons for it, why don't you send me a vocal stem and an instrumental stem? And if my processing, my compression, or my EQ subtly changes the balance between the two, then I can manipulate it. But when I send it back to them, if they don't like it, then I didn't do my job, because then it's falling upon my ears to change a balance which, if their balance was really good in the original mix, and if my compression or other processing subtly changed that balance, it can do that. And I can give you examples, but maybe the percussion got a little loud. And if the percussion got a little loud, it might have obscured the vocal. Or maybe the bass, which needed more boost, that's a technical word, boost, obscured the harmonics of the bass, obscured the vocal a little bit, then did I do my job? And if I get stems, I could subtly restore the vocal level to its original intention. And I'll go back and forth, listen to what was the intended, where did they want the vocal to sit? And I'll try to make sure that by using those two stems that what I'm giving them is what they intended, but with an enhanced production. Okay. But there's more. I worked on a very famous in the Latin world recently single Fonseca, what's his name? Fonseca, oh my gosh, I'm having a momentary memory lapse. But anyway, a really well-known Latin singer. And it was mixed with great care. I understand they worked ages on it to get perfect balance in all the spots. But when I heard it, I told the mix engineer, who's a good friend of mine, that I thought the vocal was a little bit harsh, a little bit sibilant, and could use some warming. And he said to me, well, yeah, I agree, but are we going to go down a delicate road here by letting you work on the vocal, because it could change the delicate relationships? Well, I'm daring. What am I going to lose? What they said when you were in high school and you asked for your first date. What's the worst thing she could say is no. So what's the worst thing that could happen to me is they could say, Bob, you messed up the vocal. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll do it again. So I've been around long enough to feel like I've got a good sense of it. So I asked for 2 stems. They sent me 2 stems, and I worked on the vocal sibilance and the warmth in its own, channel, so to speak. And it did, I felt, reduce the impression of the vocal against the instrumental by what turned out, and you'll freak out, only 0.2 of a dB. So I cheated the vocal up 0.2 of a dB after I had warmed it up and fixed the de-essing, and they were thrilled. They were really happy. Nobody said, Bob, our delicate balance has been disturbed, nothing of the sort. So worked out. And I'm not shy. Another one of the times when I'll ask for stems is, it's not everybody in the world has monitors that go down to the center of the earth. And many people are mixing with speakers, small speakers these days, that don't have decent bass response. And one of the most common stems that I'll ask for if I feel that the bass has problems is the bass, because of that issue. But I may go beyond that, and be daring. And it's a risk that I could take. And so far, I've either been lucky or skilled. You can make your own choice. I've either been really lucky or I have the skill, because people are also recording bass direct box through a direct box, and it has no definition or tone, none of that stuff. So I will offer and suggest that if they send me a separate bass stem, I will put it through an amp simulator. They could do it too, but if they don't have the judgment, if they've got these small speakers, they're not hearing it right. They don't hear the problem that it has. So I've got the monitoring to do it. And I might put it through an amp simulator and an equalizer, maybe a compressor if it's not balanced well. And that's it becomes part of the mastering process. So we get kind of a hybrid between mixing and mastering, and I'm not afraid to offer it. But I was recently on a podcast with Tony Mance, who said, I don't know how to mix, he said. I don't mix. I wouldn't know how. And there are plenty of mastering engineers who wouldn't even dare do that. But I have a lot of experience both mixing and mastering, and so I'm not afraid to make a suggestion. But if it gets over a couple of stems, or 3 or 4 at the most, then I'm mixing. And you wonder, are you hiring me to mix this, or are you hiring me to master it? And we'll have a good long talk. We'll discuss whether they want to go back to the drawing board and remix, which is always better, folks, always better. I'm not going to say that maybe what I'm doing is a Band-Aid, not a cure either. That's a possibility. We discuss whether they're ready to go back to the drawing board, or whether they want me to work with their stems. And sometimes we'll just go back to the mix and they'll remix it. And I'll say, that's great, much better. And I'll work with that.
Well, I think it's great that you can provide them the feedback they need to achieve those results. That's the important thing. And one of the things I really appreciate about you is you're the ultimate communicator in that regard. I mean, being diplomatic enough, but you are also able to explain the problem and point someone to the solution.
And didn't come easy, I had to learn tact just as much as anybody else in this business. And eventually, through the school of hard knocks, I learned how to be tactful.
Well, let's move on to Bob. You're the co-chair of an AES streaming loudness committee.
Yes, I am.
I'd like to hear a little about that.
Okay.
Or a lot.
Not too much. No more than is promising about it. We are creating a revision to a document that's already out there called TD 1004, which is recommendations on streaming loudness. But a lot has happened since I actually chaired that previous committee. Now I'm a co-chair in several years. And one of them is that recordings, many masters that are out there today are very squished and squashed and hyper-compressed. And finally, after a long time, NARIS started to get involved, listening to complaints from the producers and engineers wing that, it's time to see if we can come up with some standards or at least some recommendations. Nobody would want to dictate to somebody to tell you how to mix, but certainly would like to give you recommendations, especially when your recording is going to end up on Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music or Beats Music or any of these places. And those places will normalize, that means to adjust the loudness of your master. So the more you turn it up, the more they're going to turn it down, and to acknowledge that. And so we've got NARIS involved in our AES committee. We've got Google, Apple, Tidal, Qobuz, which is one of those audiophile, like Tidal is in many ways, streaming people. And we're all trying to work together to produce a single, if not a standard, at least a recommendation, and hope that there will be voluntary and eventually, if it becomes a standard, adherence to that, so that when you're mixing and when we are mastering, we know what will happen to our master when it goes out. We need this desperately. And so maybe by the end of the year, you'll hear the final progress of our paper. We do have numbers. Tentatively, more than tentatively, I think it's going to happen. So I'll give you some numbers, but it's not been published yet. So these are preliminary, all right? Does everybody know what LUFS stands for and what it is?
Raise your hand.
Yes.
If you do.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All you need is LUFS, folks. LUFS. Okay. So the recommendation that we're working on, and which seems to have acceptance at the NARIS creative side as well as on the technical side, is that the loudest is to use album normalization, not track normalization, so that we can preserve the producers, artists, and engineers' intent. Because if you do track normalization, every track is set to the same loudness, and you don't have your ballads, you don't have your soft songs, you don't have your loud songs. So we're recommending to use album normalization, and we are recommending that the loudest track on the album as produced by the streaming service, be minus 14 LUFS. If the peak to loudness ratio of the master is greater than 14, let's say it's 16 dB, let's say that it comes in at minus 16 LUFS with a full scale peak, that's allowed. That's within the range that's acceptable. So the streamer could reproduce the impact and punch without adding any peak limiting, which Spotify is currently doing for its loud setting, as they're applying peak limiting. So we're not recommending peak limiting. And so between 14 or minus 14 and minus 16 LUFS for the loudest track on the album works out for most pop music. It doesn't work out well for a lot of classical music and maybe wide dynamic range music, but we're able to deal with that as well in the recommendation. So there's a good chance that we're going to have Naris behind this and a number of streamers, including YouTube, Google and YouTube, that will all try to set a voluntary standard that then you guys mixing and we guys mastering can deal with.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that explanation, Bob. Also, I wanted to ask you what you're currently working on or what's currently floating your boat, as they say.
Well, I'm a techie. Every piece of gear that you see behind me, this is actually, if you haven't guessed already, a chroma key of the studio. So they're not actually behind me, but I can make that work. Every piece of gear that's behind me, I have chosen not just for sonic reasons, but also for technical reasons. And in Studio B, I have purchased a new device that really thrills me. So, excuse me, that's the mix room. Not this is the mastering room. Hiccups. In Studio B, I purchased, and I don't want to make this sound like an advertisement, but it's the only device of its kind. So how can I not talk about it? Well, it's almost the only device of its kind. So I think we can talk generically, but I do want to give then two brand names that I would recommend that you look into and explain why. More people these days are working in the box, totally in the computer. But one of the technical obstacles is that nonlinear processing, which means compression or expansion or harmonic generation, those tube emulators, they're all nonlinear. They add distortion. Nonlinear processing in the digital domain has a cost. And that cost is called aliasing. In order to combat that aliasing, you need to upsample. And so you might find some of your favorite analog simulators or even just plain compressors that are not simulators. They have their own algorithms, I guess, that they are upsampling prior to processing and then downsampling after that. But, I'd like to think that 2 times upsampling isn't enough. If, let's say, you're working at 44 or 48, what amount of upsampling is enough so that it actually sounds pure and clean and open and natural and without any harshness that I call digititis, without any digititis? I think that you might need at least 8 times oversampling, maybe more. Or else you may not get the harshness, you may get a little bit of fuzziness from the harmonics that are, the subharmonics that are generated in the audible band by interaction between the sample rate and the high frequencies of the source signal, that, or the high frequencies that are generated by the distortion generator. Okay, so the solutions are either use a really fine, very pure, clean, upsampling digital compressor, or to use a genuine analog piece of gear. Now, one of the downsides of that is recall. I mean, I have to take notes as to what all the settings of this Mazalek device are for each song. So I have a recall sheet, and I use Session Recall, which has an image of the Mazalek, and I draw into it. This knob is here. This knob is here. This knob is there, and you know, human error comes in. I do my best. Maybe I forget to note this song, or I made a mistake. It happens once in a while. Even if I'm as detailed as I can be, I don't always get that perfect, but I do have recall sheets for every piece of gear. So that's a downside. And people like working in the box because it's quicker, it's faster, and you can have 20 of this plugin, you know, one after another. So, you know, those are the upsides. But if you use your ears, do they sound as pure, as open, as clean, as undistorted by virtue of lack of aliasing as my analog gear? And there's other things. Some of the analog distortion is very euphonic. It adds a certain dimension and depth. And, you know, there are people who are convinced that they can work totally in the box digitally. Not me. I would say at this point in my mastering, 90% of my masters go through analog processing. 10%, the ones that need transparency and purity, I will use digital processing. And I may use a digital EQ, which is not nonlinear, or an analog EQ that I don't have the digititis issues with most of the good digital EQs, the plugins. So what's been my solution in Studio B up till January this year? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 channels of outboard analog compressors. But what a pain to set them up again and recall them. It's an old story. I mean, in the old days, that's all we had was, you know, analog processors in the racks. And, you know, we just shrugged our shoulders and said, okay, this is close enough. And it's fine. But, you know, people's standards increase and they want to, you know, the client comes and says, I want a revision. You say, you don't want to tell them, I can't do a revision. I'm just turning the knobs, you know. So we need a better solution. And I purchased a device from a company called MCDSP. MCDSP. Yeah, that's how it's spelled. How do you spell DSP? Okay, so it's called the APB-16. And they've recently made an APB-8. Now, what's special about the APB-16? It's a single U rack mount box, which has inside of it 16 D to A converters, 16 A to D converters, and some very high quality proprietary digitally controlled analog saturators. And you have a right to be skeptical about that because, you know, how good could that be, you know? Now you've got digitally controlled analog. Is it going to sound any good? I took my chance. I bought it. I could have returned it. And I was thrilled. All my digititis is gone. I don't have to use any more digital plugins. And I get up to 16 channels of very high quality plugins from those guys. One of them is a tube that he calls it the Moo Tube compressor. And I don't know how he gets the quality of tubes in there, but the saturation is very natural. It doesn't have any harshness, and it's very open and clean. And the transients from those snare drums going through those things are amazing. And I haven't heard that except from one or two of my outboard analog compressors. But in the box, I don't think I've heard a single in the box compressor that can come close to it. They either seem a little sluggish, or they can't. If you want to push them more than a dB or so, they don't seem to have the impact that these analog pieces have. So I'm mixing I have a lot of a couple of guest engineers who come and mix for me or under my supervision in Studio B, and one of them has mixed an R&B recording, and we used the 3-band Moo compressor that he has, and we're both blown away. Very, very, very clean, very open. And I've been using 6 of their stereo compressors on 6 buses of the Knoxville Jazz Orchestra from Live in Concert. Now, last year, I was also offered to mix this. I don't usually mix. My specialty, I don't have a specialty in mastering. I'll work with any genre of music, but my specialty in mixing is usually jazz. Okay. So I decided I would mix the Knoxville Jazz last year, and I mixed it in Studio A. This was before I knew enough about Pro Tools to dare to mix in Studio B. And before I got the MCDSP, so I mixed 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxophones, electric guitar, bass, piano, drums, vocalist in some cases, electric violin in another case, all digitally using a plugin that shall remain nameless for the brass, for the winds. And I discovered that it was just, even at 48 kilohertz sampling, it was getting harsh for me. But I lived with it. I sent it in. They loved the mix. Nobody complained except me. I didn't like it. It was harsh. And in January, I heard about the MCDSP. I bought it for Studio B, and the same group, the Knoxville Jazz, liked my work so much last year that I mixed, this time though, with multiple channels of analog outboard, but inboard, okay, with full recall. I don't have to think about writing down anything. They are plugins, but the plugins control these analog processors. That's the difference. And I sent a mix a week ago to the technical director of the Knoxville Jazz, and we spoke a couple of days later, and he said, "Bob, I'm jealous." He said, "I'm blown away. It's just so pure." I said, "I made the trumpet sound like they were recorded with ribbon mics, didn't I?" It's not easy when you have, there are reasons why it's recommended in the recording world to record brass with ribbons, because they get bright and hard with condensers. But in concert, is ADK, I forget the brand name, of the condensers that they're using, I'm so sorry, it's not Audio-Technica. Anyway, they had 4 condenser mics on the trumpets, maybe this far from the mouth, the bell, and 4 condenser mics on the saxes, performing at full blast live in concert. Okay, that's a real challenge. And the intermodulations between the brass and the saxes and the trombones produces additional harmonics and intermodulations, all kind. It's a real challenge. Well, this MCDSP came in for me, totally blew away the others. So my idea that I could get rid of digititis worked out. And I also have another digitally controlled analog processor in Studio A. It's the better maker, so there's another brand for you. So it's not just a brand-specific recommendation. And where was I? The difference is the MCDSP uses Thunderbolt. And all the analog control signals, all the digital control signals for the analog processors get carried over Thunderbolt along with the audio, and the audio comes back into the plugin, which receives it from the D to A, from the A to D converter. So the plugin does the control signals get sent up the Thunderbolt pipe, then they get separated, and then it goes to a D to A converter, and then those analog saturators and compressors and other magic things do their work, and then it gets A to D converted. So you don't have if there's harmonic distortion above 20 kilohertz, well, above 24 kilohertz, it gets properly filtered by the A to D converter. If there's any distortion would be that which these analog devices produce, no aliasing. And it comes back sounding pure, clean, and open. And I have 11 more songs to mix, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Sounds like a game changer.
I think it is. It's not cheap. I forget what I paid. I think it's $6,000 for these 16 channels. And you say, oh my God, that's a big investment. But don't forget, you don't have any analog wiring. I did not have to add any more channels to my interface. I did not have to run analog cables to XLRs, label them and number them and plug them in to outboard gear. Okay? And inside this processor, the distance between the analog distance is only a couple of inches on a PC board trace. So instead of going through, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, I don't care, of analog cables going to your different analog processors, it's all literally in the box. And I don't think we should discount the fact that the analog cable run is very small. But I did take a chance. There's processing in there. Did it sound any good? And yeah, it did.
Well, and that just goes to prove the old adage that the cleanest signal is a straight wire.
Except it went through digital, analog, digital. Now, there's a very small loss in D to A and A to D conversion, a very small loss in transparency. So you have to balance out and decide, is the analog processing that I'm doing, does it outweigh going through these converters? And like I said, for 90% of the masters that I do downstairs, I do use outboard analog. For the 10% that need more transparency than I can get by going through the D to A to D route, I work in the box.
Well, it's fascinating. Any more questions, gentlemen?
Kind of following on that whole MCDSP, that whole APB route. What is your thought on? There's a lot of plugins that are kind of they're smart now, like Soothe and other like and GoFast. Well, Soothe specifically does a lot of deharshening. What are your thoughts on like AI and like modern technology and kind of where that's going? Do you find those plugins kind of helpful? Because they do a lot of automated processes that you just really can't do on any one EQ because they're doing a lot of EQ moves all at once.
It's getting better and better. I don't use Soothe. I have plenty of outboard gear that works well for me. My assistant at times, but after COVID, he hasn't been much of an assistant. He hasn't come here in a while. Matt Davis has his own mastering room. We have a great relationship. He likes Soothe. I'm skeptical. But AI has its future, but watch out for artifacts. You know, we start to learn with the in-the-box compressors, we learned to watch out for the fuzziness and the digititis and the aliasing. With the AI, what we need to watch out for are space monkeys. What are the space monkeys? Okay. All right. I'll bet you're all hearing space monkeys on this Zoom call. And by the time it gets transcoded again, because you're capturing me through one codec, and then you have to edit it in the PCM domain, that's linear, and then you have to encode it again. That second encoding at very low bit rate really adds up. And you start to get these space monkeys and the sibilants sounding like, okay? The artificial intelligence in isotopes, they have a plugin in Isotope that does some kind of automatic remixing and separates out the individual instruments and allows you to change their panning and their leveling. Well, it's in RX. I don't use that part of RX. I would not even dare, okay? But maybe some hip-hop people want to steal a sample. It's a great way to get your samples if you can get away with it, but not without what I'll call Zoom-like space monkey artifacts, okay? And these artificial intelligence algorithms depend on masking for you to not notice it. If the other instruments mask the issues so when you listen to each one individually, you might hear this little artifact. But is it ready for prime time? I don't know what Soothe does if it uses artificial intelligence. Do you know?
Yes, it kind of searches for like resonant peaks, and it kind of does a lot of EQ moves. And the same thing with GoFast. Well, GoFast kind of does it kind of matches a curve, but it does like a lot of micro adjustments looking for resonant peaks. It's like a deesser deharsher, like it's like the ultimate deesser because it's constantly kind of scanning and moving around, and then you can kind of push it to focus more on a specific frequency range where there's a problem, and then it'll be more abrasive to that.
Well, the AI tools that I've used so far are great aids, but they're labor intensive, and don't let them pretend that they aren't. If you don't have ears, I wouldn't be surprised to discover that Soothe can mess up a recording as easily as it can fix it. That would be something to watch out for and make sure you can hear that. But I have no experience with Soothe and currently no interest in trying it. I'm sorry, I've got plenty of devices that sweeten the sound under my control right now.
Well, I think, Bob, you hit the nail on the head with the current situation we are in with the lockdown and the entire world going to Zoom. I think space monkeys are in our future for as long as I can foresee.
Yeah, and when you watch a Zoom call on one of the networks on television, you've got multiple issues. you have microphone technique or lack of same. Here I'm speaking directly into a Schoeps hypercardioid, which is a very high fidelity microphone, very clean. And I'm trying to stay on mic. So that helps. So you want to start, okay, but you have these people using Apple earbuds or staying, miles away from their built-in microphones in their MacBooks or whatever. And then it gets coded with a real cheap, slow codec. Then it gets brought to the network, which captures it in PCM and edits it. And then it gets broadcast out again with another codec. And these cumulative codecs, what we call transcoding, maybe you can get away with one, but two in series combined with bad mic technique and masks. Sometimes I can't even understand what these people are saying.
Exactly. Well, I've about run out of questions. Anybody else got anything?
That's good because I've run out of answers.
I guess now in the age of streaming and all these others codecs, how much do you, when you're mastering, anticipate where this is going to be played back on? So has your approach changed, or how much has your approach changed anticipating CDs to now you anticipate more for streaming? Like, how much do you kind of anticipate the playback medium going, well, this record's going to be mainly consumed this way, and so maybe I should approach my mastering such?
Good question, Jonathan. My answer is no. Negative. 9. Yet. Okay? When you try to anticipate the errors that you're going to meet up with, there is no such thing as a free lunch. But I have heard of some kind of an artificial intelligence plugin that tries to anticipate what codecs will do. I haven't tested it, so I can't answer that. But you cannot fix it with EQ. You can't fix it with compression. You can't fix it with anything. Mix and or master to a good natural peak to loudness ratio, clean, wide range recordings, and it will translate the best it can over every medium that you can put it through.
Yes. Wonderful answer, Bob. I totally agree with that. Any more questions?
One more, I guess, for people starting out. Do you have any advice for people looking to get into mastering? Just to kind of open it up to people who may be just starting out, because we've been talking kind of technical with the codecs. Like, what should someone, like, they're thinking about mastering, what would be the first thing that they should focus on? Should they what should they do?
Read my book.
That is a good starting point.
Thank you.
Great plug for the library. And what's the title of that book, Bob? Oh, here we go.
Mastering Audio.
3rd edition. Okay. So ear education. If you can apprentice with someone who has and it's hard in these age of codecs, of COVID, I mean, I haven't accepted any new interns in a long time. I've been working my arse off just trying to do this alone. It's not easy. But if you can apprentice with an engineer, producer, who has a very good monitoring system, it's a real ear education. That would be the first thing. But, you can practice your techniques at home, but can you hear properly the changes that you're making? That's the question I have.
Very good. Well, I'd like to thank you, Bob, for your time and your expertise. And thank you for joining us on the Reel to Reel podcast, brought to you by the Melrose Center. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, joined by my co-host, Jonathan. And we'd like to thank our guest, Bob Katz.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
All right. And join us next month when our guest will be the Sauce Boss, Bill Wharton. We have so much more in store coming up on future episodes. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcasting app. Join us next month for another episode with another exclusive look at the life behind the board in the music industry. Thank you, gentlemen.